college students graduates of Reddit. What's the craziest thing you ever witnessed in your dorm residence hall? NSFW. A guy I knew used to hook up with girls and then throw their clothes into the hall outside his room. Then lock them out of his room, making them get dressed in the hall in front of whomever was around. I think he works for Comcast now. Which fits. 2 things. Same dude. We had a guy whose room was at the end of the hall, so it had a little extra space next to his door. A little alcove. We had tour groups come through our dorm with prospective students and their families. Well, on one of those days he tore out a bunch of pics from his Playboys and posted them all over his door and on the walls outside his room. He took 3 chairs from the common room and put them outside his room as well. He then had a sign that said the Itches and Hoes waiting room. A mother went absolutely ballistic when she saw that. He got into deep ed for it too. A few months later, when another tour group came through, our Bill, who was a total asshole, was giving kind of a speech to the high schoolers and their families. So our buddy fell out of his room in just his boxers and his hands tied behind his back with a sock in his mouth. He spit the sock out and started yelling, "Bill, untie me. This isn't funny." Our was humiliated. The parents went absolutely nuts over it. Our buddy was kicked out later that day. Boarding school here. MP3, phones etc. were prohibited, but a few people, including me, still had them. One of them was caught and expelled and all the charging points were covered up. There was one uncovered socket left, but it was 18 feet above ground and was for a big appliance. The solution we came up with was to steal stuff from the physics lab and make a voltage regulator. Then make 2 stacks of 3 people standing on top of each other. The top 2 guys worked the wires and got us a connection. 1 stack went up every day for almost a week before we were able to get a wire extender with a socket and get a permanent connection. It is still the craziest, most innovative thing that I have personally witnessed. Lived in a 21-floor tower. Something like 1,600 students lived in it. 4 guys decided to have a jam session in an elevator and go up and down the building. Had drums, guitar, saxophone, and vocalist. I think every single floor wanted to murder them. One guy peed on a cookie sheet and let it freeze outside in winter. He took said frozen sheet of pee and slid it under another guy's door when he wasn't there. All the rooms in that dorm were carpeted. One of my friend's girlfriends had a roommate that would masturbate almost every night. She said it sounded like someone vigorously stirring macaroni. I remember this story every time I cook macaroni. I was in RA. I had 8 residents trap a raccoon and bring it into their dorm to domesticate it. Guess what happens when you let a raccoon in the dorm? It ducks it up. A guy that was wasted and tripping balls went into the wrong room in the middle of the night and was thrown out of said room. Across the hall and through the wall into my old room. Turns out there had been a giant hole there that was cheaply patched up years ago. Otherwise there should have been no way he could have gone straight through the wall. It was a cold night, but my roommate and I pushed his dresser up to attempt to cover the hole until someone could fix it. Good times. The slip and slide we had on the ground floor was pretty epic, but probably not as epic as this one girl. For some reason she decided to duck 12 guys on her floor and turn the peephole backwards. Reverse peephole Seinfeld style for everyone to see. I'm fairly confident she didn't graduate. My dorm had a secret Santa thing where your Santa would give you a task to do, and if you completed it, you'd get a gift. In the packed dining hall one night shortly before Christmas break, a huge, hairy, completely naked man jumps onto a table, tucks his junk between his legs, and screams, "Daddy only likes me when I'm a little girl." My roommate was his Santa, and as a reward for completing the task, she gave him a teddy bear wearing overalls. So last winter in Boston there was about 102 of snow over the winter. Being college kids, we proceeded to build an igloo on the roof of our dorm and proceeded to hotbox it. Good times. A bunch of guys in my hall collected some masks and dangerous looking items, pocket knives mostly. I think someone had a saw for some reason, and pretended to have tied a dude to a chair with a bag over his head, ketchup for fake blood and everything. They spent half the night on chat roulette with a sign that said tits or he dies. They didn't actually get any tits, but people's reactions were pretty great. That and the time one of the engineers dented a wall by firing a custom Nerf gun he built down the length of the hall are my only really crazy stories. I lived on the 9th floor of the dorms my freshman year. One wing was males and the other wing females. One of the girls on my floor received a giant 10+ inch black dildo with a suction cup attachment as a gag gift from her friends on her 19th birthday. The guys on my floor thought it would be great fun to periodically steal and chase each other around with said dildo and beat the living hell out of each other with it. I was in my neighbor's room one day when his dorm mate busted open the door and threw this thing full force at him. Fortunately my friend was able to react quick enough to dodge out of the way. Unfortunately for us though, the dildo went careening full bore into the window behind him, smashed through it and proceeded to fall 9 stories. We watched in horror and shock as this dildo fell and hit a freshman girl on the head, who immediately collapsed and began convulsing. Cops and paramedics came and took me, my 2 neighbors and the poor girl who owned the dildo down to the campus police station. They put us all into an interrogation room where we waited until a detective came in with the dildo in hand. He then proceeded to slam down the suction cup end of the dildo onto the middle of the interrogation table. We all lost it. We couldn't stop laughing due to the fact that this thing was slowly wobbling back and forth during the whole interrogation. And don't worry, the girl who got conked in the head with this thing was fine in the end. Guy down the hall was just nasty, smelled bad, slovenly, but very friendly. He never went to class. You might be thinking gamer, but nope. He was a day trader. Always told us about his wins losses for that day. Anyway, this was before mobile devices, and he hardly ever left his computer as a result. Traded in movements of pennies, so he had milk jugs to pee in. He told us proudly about how much time he saved by peeing in milk jugs. I presumed he'd dump them out routinely, but the first time I caught sight of his room I learned the truth. It was as messy as you'd imagine, but then I saw the jugs all over his room, the floor, windowsill, computer desk. My memory is hazy by now, but I'd say he had at least 21-gallon milk jugs full of piss in his room. To be fair, I couldn't verify that they were all actually full or just waiting in reserve, but at a glance at least some of them were clearly topped off. And honestly, how many gallons of piss is really acceptable to keep in your room? Freshman year I had a gay roommate. Let's call him Wally. We got along pretty well. We had different social circles but they overlapped a bit so we would hang out on occasion. Wally had game. Dude would bring guys back a fair amount and sexile me, but that was fine cause I did the same to him and that's just how it works, right? But eventually, he found a boyfriend. I figured that meant more sexiling for me, but oddly enough, Wally's boyfriend would stay over every now and then, but Wally would never text me to ask if I wouldn't mind bailing for a half hour or whatever. Then one fateful night, I awoke to the sound of a creaking bed, and there it was, Wally having butt sex with his boyfriend. Apparently they'd been banging while I was asleep for months, and being a relatively deep sleeper, I was none the wiser. But there it was, my very own Brokeback Mountain. Oh, did I mention that his boyfriend had the same name as me? And when I woke to find Wally plowing him, Wally just happened to be moaning his boyfriend's name. My name? TL. Doctor, I awoke to my roommate moaning my name while he gave to his boyfriend orgy style. One day I woke up to a sink sitting in the hallway, like a sink that is built into a countertop or something. Someone must have just ripped a sink out of a countertop from a different building and put it in the hallway on the 4th floor. I was a sophomore at University of Iowa on the engineering dorm. The problem was that the main cafeteria of the campus was downstairs, so drunk people would get confused and wander to it even though it was closed, then start having fun on other floors. It was Saturday night and pretty miserable outside, so most people were staying in, when we heard a scream. Then a loud crack. When we checked on it, there was nobody in the hallway. There was, however, a large smear of blood along the wall, and the exit sign was broken. One of the guys decided to investigate and found a huge guy in the bathroom, bleeding from the face and drunk. Turns out he had the brilliant idea of running down the hallway, leaping into the air, and headbutting the exit sign. Edit, since a few Hawkeyes have asked. Yes, it was Burge. One naked drunk dude jumped through 1st floor window, as in broke the window with his bare skin. Rah here. Seen some it. But the worst was when I was a freshman. I had this roommate. Mike. Mike was a ithead. Came from money. Parents bought him a decently nice car at 16. He modified the it out of it. He thought he was the it and he could do anything he wanted. One night, Mike decides he is gonna get very drunk. Maybe take some pills. At some point during the night, for a reason we still don't know, he decided he did not like the plate glass window in the hallway of our dorm. So he dropped his shoulder and plowed into it. Spiderwebbed the entire thing. At some point later that night, he wanted to talk to some people we knew on a balcony down the hall. Instead of walking down the hall and into their room, he opened a window and headbutted the screen out so he could lean out and yell at them. At some point later in the night he did sugar and I woke up to a bunch of my it duct taped to the wall of our room. I lived on the 5th floor of a monstrous 6-story building. One night in February, the fire alarms went off at like 2 AM and the building was evacuated. No fire, no nothing. We all went back inside. The next Tuesday, the alarms went off at the same time. This time someone had taken out the fire extinguishers and thrown them from the top of the stairwells where they exploded when reaching the ground. Obviously, you can't use elevators in a fire situation and the stairwells were a disaster. It wasn't so much fun running through that. This type of thing then happened every Tuesday night for at least a month. They eventually caught the people when they tried to hit 2 dorms back to back. Edit. Grammar. One time, my roommate and I hatched quails in our dorm room. We started out with growing plants, then breeding better fish, and from there we kind of escalated to birds. Ordered a cheap incubator and the eggs online, and kept it in the corner of our room without having any real hope that any of them would hatch. 3 of them did, somehow, and they lived in our dorm room for a whole year without the Ra finding out. Helps that they only grow to be about 3 inches tall. Difficult to choose between these two. First, 2 guys on the dorm floor got into an argument at an off-campus party. One, let's say John, goes back to his room to sleep it off. The other, let's say Bill, brings 4 friends with him and kicks in John's door. As they rush in to beat up John, John grabs a pair of scissors and stabs one in the gut and one in the arm. Bill and friends do not succeed in beating up John. John was later expelled after he decided to drunkenly light artillery shell fireworks off in the upper stairwell of the dorm. Second, it was 5 AM on a Sunday morning and my friends and I had been up all night. We are walking down the hall to our rooms and past the communal bathroom. We hear an odd hissing splattering noise so we walk in to check it out. It turns out a drunk arsehole had repeatedly kicked the pipe connecting the toilet to the wall, detached it from the wall, and ran. Water shooting out of the wall at fire hydrant strength was making the hissing noise, and it hitting the wall, 8 feet away through the open stall door, was making the splattering noise. We reported it as quick as we could, but it being the ass crack of dawn on a Sunday, no maintenance workers were around so the water continued spraying for like an hour. On the 8th floor of a dorm, ended up flooding the 6th, 7th, and 8th floors and created an 8-story waterfall when it reached the stairwell. Water in the basement laundry area ended up being knee deep. There was the randomly appearing cat. I lived in a tiny dorm room on the 4th floor with one other roommate. Our windows were screened and there were no trees or other nearby buildings outside. But one night around 3 AM I suddenly woke up when my roommate Amy threw her pillow at me. I sat up and was about to ask her what the duck. Then I saw she was huddled on her bed against the wall looking scared. And there was a little black cat on the floor between our beds. Then I did ask her what the duck. Where did the cat come from? Weren't we forbidden from having pets? Apparently she just woke up and it was there. Our windows were closed. Our door was locked. And Amy was afraid to put her feet on the floor to let the cat out. I was still kind of groggy and just wanted to go to sleep and deal with it in the morning. So I got up, opened the door, led the cat to the hallway, and let it out the fire escape. It went willingly enough. Then I went back to bed and gave Amy back her pillow. It kept happening like once or twice a month during that first semester. Just that same cat reappearing in our room in the wee hours of the night. But never when we're staying up late. We never did figure out how it kept getting in. It was kinda cute, though. I mean, it was a cat. My college dorm experience was clearly devoid of truly creative types because the craziest thing I ever saw was the engineering students duct taping someone to the wall. Someone on my floor freshman year invited a homeless guy over to sleep on his couch. The next morning the homeless guy was gone and so was the guy's Xbox and all his games. Edit. He was drunk when he brought the guy back. One of the RAs got fired. I can't remember why. He had a week to move out of his dorm room, and it coincided with Mother's Weekend. Lots of moms visiting campus. He decided to get a keg and invite a bunch of people over as a duck to his bosses. His room was larger than most, since he was an RA. When they broke up the party, the people stumbling out were frat bros and drunk moms, and a couple of grandmothers. When my now husband was in college, the thermostat to the whole building was in his room. He discovered he could make the fire alarm go off simply by moving it 1 degree up. So he made the alarm go off at 2 AM. He did this 3 times. In his same suite, he had a roommate who once asked him to shave his head. My husband did not oblige. The guy left one day, never to return. After a month, the janitorial staff came in with shovels, literally, and shoveled out ungodly amounts of porn from his room. My roommate, a girl who lived across the hall, we will call her Sarah, and myself were sitting in the common room, which is situated right between the 2 dorm rooms, studying, chatting together. We were talking about place we'd traveled or something when the other girl's roommate comes down the stairs wrapped in a towel, presumably from having taken a shower, and into the common room. As she's walking toward the room, she casually says, "Hey Sarah, I'm going to bed now." Sarah says okay, and continues the conversation she was having with my roommate and I. Her roommate stops in her tracks and repeats, "I'm going to bed now." Sarah gets an embarrassed look on her face, gets up, and silently follows her roommate into the room and shuts the door. A college divided the dorms into houses, the idea being that you would do stuff with your house and form a community. The problem was that I already had a group of friends and this community was completely obnoxious. So I went to the first required meeting and then promptly did nothing with them ever again. Fast forward 2 months and 2 girls who lived down the hall run up to me and asked to take a picture with me, which I thought weird but sure. Turns out that it was so uncommon for people in my house to see me that I was an item in a photo scavenger hunt. Oh man, so many. I lived in the party dorm at a relatively party-wise school, and some of the hockey players lived on our floor. I saw wonderful examples of humanity, such as a hockey bro sitting in the stairwell because he thought it was the bathroom, 2 hockey bros carrying a cheering girl, notably naked, back to their room and then railing her with the door wide open, hockey bros punching and breaking the exit's electronic light sign thing. This happened on 3 separate occasions. I have no idea why the university kept replacing them. A wasted hockey bro pissing all over his clothes with the door wide open. He was grinning in bliss the whole time. I had some friends cut down a Christmas tree from campus somewhere and put it up in their dorm room. The only thing is, real Christmas trees are not allowed because they're a crazy fire hazard. They bought one of those things you would put a live plant in, a planter, some 90-degree brackets, and some screws and screwed the tree down. Then they built a false top and sprinkled dirt and rocks, again taken from campus, on it to make it look like the tree was planted in dirt. They convinced our that they had an uncle who had a tree farm and allowed them to dig up a real tree to use for the year. My absolute favorite part is that they returned the saw they used to Walmart. It was the first or second weekend of moving into my freshman year dorm. People were in the floor lounge and everyone was sort of slyly drinking mixed drinks in cups or bottles to not let the RAs know what was going on. More and more people kept coming and it was getting a little crowded in the lounge, so everyone decided to go to the basement, which was like a dorm-wide lounge with pool and ping pong tables and what have you. Eventually everyone got really drunk high and there were probably at least 75 drunk freshmen in the basement. At some point someone discovered that the free condoms, oral dams, and lube were also located in the basement. That's when someone shut off most of the lights, brought down a stereo and made a lube slip and slide. It was probably the funnest night I had in college, until the cops showed up and tackled like 6 people and everyone ran to their rooms screaming, TLDR, drunk lube slip and slide in the basement of my dorm. So many stories. One of my favorites is the kid that got suspended for repeatedly climbing along the outside of the dormitories dressed in full Spider-Man regalia. Everyone thought his was funny when he climbed from the first to the second floor. But By the end of the week, he was climbing the 7th, 8th, etc. and the school was terrified they would be held liable if he died. The dorm director told him he would be removed from campus if it continued, and his response was, "I'm sorry, but with great power comes great responsibility." He was kicked out the next day after making it to the roof. Lived in an engineering dorm once. Apparently the shower jerking was bad, as jizz water came up the drain. The 4-person suite across the hall from mine managed to spill beer on their beanbag chair, so they threw it in the shower to rinse it off. They forgot about it and flooded their bathroom and it leaked to the room below. I laughed about it for a while. Had a roommate who literally squeaked like a 130-pound mouse when she had sex with her boyfriend, which she would do with 3 of us hanging out in the outer room at 4 p.m. I walked in on a random girl alone in my dorm room. She was squatting over my roommate's pillow and eating on it. I just walked out of the room. I'm an RA at my college. This thread is horrifying. There was some dude named Pat on my floor in my freshman year of college. My best Pat story. As I walked back to my dorm one day, I noticed a dead squirrel in the courtyard outside of the building. Like the rest of the other normal human beings that spotted the poor thing, we walked by it and thought nothing of it. Pat had different plans. He took the squirrel and froze it in his dorm room refrigerator for about a week. Then he tied a tiny noose and hanged it from the light in one of the dorm elevators, complete with some sort of suicide note about an acorn shortage. He put the elevator out of commission for the entire weekend. Thanks, Pat. Hall apple. About to go to sleep when I hear drunken shenanigans in the hallway. Emerge to find our old and squishy dining hall apples soaring down the corridor to be met, baseball-like, with a tennis racket. This was not an isolated incident. It probably happened a half-dozen nights before the RAs were able to stamp out the practice. I woke up in the middle of the night one night to the sounds of some very loud variachoistics. Confused and curious, I looked out of my peephole. Nothing outside, so I assumed it wasn't in the hall, but in a few moments I saw 3 people walk into the room across the hall in towels soaking wet. 2 guys and 1 girl. They were having a loud threesome in the communal showers. The kid in the room next to me had his uncle over, who overdosed on heroin and died. Police questioned me and a couple people on the floor, just to get some information. 0/10 would not repeat night again. Edit. Heroin. The drug. There were no courageous women involved. We had a guy called Crazy Mike on our floor, because 1. Most people thought he was crazy, and 2. We had 2 other Mikes, Tall Mike, and just Mike, who was our friend. People would get really freaked out by him in the elevator waiting for it, but he was 2 doors down from me. He was, I believe, in his late 20s, so bigger than a lot of us. But things he would do: 1. Talk to himself saying things like "No, don't hurt her, she didn't do anything wrong," and argue with himself about it when a girl was waiting for the elevator with him. 2. Slam his door hard and yell at himself or argue with himself. Sometimes some pretty depressing things, but just scream whatever it was. 3. Some people said he slammed his head against the dorm glass in the elevator waiting room and on the elevator door. He was eventually removed from the floor. Not sure where he went though. He was normally actually nice if you talked to him. Just seemed to have a personality disorder or something. And that plus him being older, larger than a lot of people was kind of freaky.